Welcome back to another episode of Demystifying Self-Publishing. I'm your host, Alyssa, and today's episode is a special one. It's about family, legacy, and the power of storytelling. We are joined by Tim Sherry, son of iconic Canadian hockey legend Don Sherry, to talk about a remarkable book that was written by Tim's late sister, Cindy, The Don Sherry Story. Cindy tragically passed away unexpectedly last year, leaving behind not only this book, but also a profound legacy of love, generosity, and advocacy. Tim, thank you for being here with us today.
Well, thank you for having me. It's quite exciting.
Absolutely. Now, I've had the pleasure of reading Cindy's book, The Don Cherry Story, and it's a very intimate portrayal of your father, beloved Canadian icon Don Cherry. Having grown up with Coach's Corner in our house from a very young age, in my eyes and the eyes of many Canadians, your father is interwoven into the fabric of our culture. Cindy paints a picture in her book about the sacrifices and consequences of being a struggling hockey family. What was it like in those early days before your dad was known as Don Cherry, the public figure?
I look back at it fondly. It's so involved in sports when your father's playing hockey and is part of a team of the Rochester Americans. When I grew up, I was in Spokane and he was in Kitchener and some other places that in Sudbury, Three Rivers. So Cindy went all over the place. I'm lucky. I just kind of started in Rochester, then moved to Boston. But it was a lot of fun. You know, the team was very tight knit. The families went out. It isn't really good to say, but if you ever watch the movie Goodfellas, and the wife says about Henry Hill, she says, we were like a family. We did everything together. And that's what the hockey players did. Like, you know, the wives came over and had coffee, and Cindy and I played with all the other players' kids. And, you know, there was a Christmas party that we would all go to. And so it was a lot of fun. And mom and dad had a lot of fun. You know, I asked mom because, you know, dad was only making $5,000 a year. You know, the hockey season would be over, and 2 weeks later, he'd be working construction when I grew up in Rochester or sometimes in Hershey, Pennsylvania. And mom said she just enjoyed it because the players, after every game, they would go out together as a team. Because surprisingly enough, they weren't allowed to drink water on the bench or between periods because they thought it bloated them. So you can imagine after the game how thirsty these guys were. So it was like a shower, boom, to the bar, two quick, you know, first two beers dads didn't even touch their lips. And they all went out together and had a good time. So it was a lot of fun. The tough time came when dad retired in, I think it was 72. And that was amidst of a pretty big recession. He had kind of thought that, all right, he's going to resign himself, that he was going to be a construction worker for the rest of his life. And he liked that. He liked working construction. Didn't like getting up early in the morning, but he still liked working the construction. They laid him off and he couldn't find a job. And mom and dad kind of kept that away from Cindy and I, but that was a tough time for mom and dad. Not knowing what your future was. You know, dad was grade eight education, didn't really have a trade. The trade that he did have was just a day laborer, and there were thousands of them laid off. And then have him having to make the comeback. That was kind of the tough time. But other than that, you know, looking back at it, it was a lot of fun.
And Cindy talks about that period, and it's a long period though, right? Where your mom Rose marries Don in their
Yeah, very
and she's
early.
thinking, she's marrying this hockey player playing in the minor leagues, and Cindy writes that she's was naive to think that they would stay in the same town of
They're going to stay in Hershey the whole time. Yeah.
Hershey for their whole life, and live a happy life there. But it was maybe not 20 years, but quite a few years. And how many different times did they move? I think it was like
30 times or something like that they moved.
Sure.
Yeah, yeah.
So
Again,
it's
I was lucky. I came in after all that. But yeah, Mom and dad got married, dad in Hershey, and that was kind of filled with a bit of controversy because dad was Protestant and mom was a Roman Catholic, and the mom got excommunicated from the Catholic Church because she married a heathen, a Protestant, and my dad's mom, Anna, was not very fond of the Catholics. I said, "What was your mom like?" Well, you came home and said, "I'm marrying a Roman Catholic Italian girl." I don't think she was too happy at the start, but all was good once they met. Um, but they thought, mom thought that they were going to stay in Hershey forever. And then I think 2 years, then they went to Springfield, and then they went to Three Rivers, and then they went to Kitchener, then they went to Sudbury. And then after every year, they were just living in apartments. They would either go back to Hershey or they would go back to Kingston. And as I say, dad would work in Kingston. He worked for the public utilities company. Hershey, he was working for the Hershey chocolate factory. He built the Reese's factory there. And then we went to Rochester. He worked for Kodak in the summer, and that's where they kind of laid down the roots, was in Rochester. Mom and dad kind of just rolled with the punches, right? Mom says, they said they had a good time. They didn't have a lot, but they enjoyed life.
Cindy describes it, the the Catholic priest in Hershey saying anyone who goes to their wedding is kicked out of the church,
Right?
something
Yeah.
like that.
Even mom's friends couldn't go. So, it was. I think most of the hockey players, a lot of dad's friends, the hockey team, get into that Goodfellas thing, or where it's the team. And then I guess afterwards they went to a party. They had a little reception, and some of mom's friends came, stuff like that. So, I said mom should have known it was going to be a kind of a roller coaster ride right after, right with that marrying dad and all that going down.
I think if we lean into that idea of family, yours was extremely tight knit. Cindy talks about in a chapter in the book the kidney transplant and seeing the binders of bills after the fact,
Yeah.
that many of the Bruins players and their wives actually donated blood throughout that process as well.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about how the transplant changed your relationship with Cindy, and if there's a specific memory that best captures her spirit and why she did what she did?
Well, everybody said, unfortunately Cindy's gone, but there is actual a piece of her that lives within me. That was a tough time for all of us. It was a very tough time for dad. Dad doesn't handle things like that very well. And it was just at the start of training camp, and we had a family decision of what we were going to do. And Harry Sinden, who was dad's general manager, was going to say, I'll take over the team at the time and coach, and then you get this done. And then mom and dad didn't want that because then it was going to get out in the paper, and they didn't want it to get out to paper till everything was kind of over with. So dad kind of went and was at training camp in Pittsburgh, and mom bared the brunt of it. Um, and it was a rough time for me. Amount of medication I was on was enormous.
And you're
My face was out. It swells up your face.
you're
Uh,
13 years old,
I was
Tim, at the
13,
time,
yeah. So I
and
was
Cindy's
18, yeah. And mom and dad and Cindy had a meeting without me and said, you got to they wanted me off dialysis, which was kind of back then was still somewhat experimental. Wasn't really not like today, how that's a lot more common. And so they did that. They had to do a match, and they matched. Cindy's match was close. Was almost We're almost biologically twins. So they sat me down and says, "Okay, Cindy's going to give you a kidney." And as a 13-year-old, having to hear that your sister is going to save you, it was, the initial shock was like, wow, like that's tough. And Cindy and I had a good relationship, but we had a similarly, rivalry relationship. I think psychologically for me, it took some time to kind of wrap my head around the whole thing, being at 13. But Cindy jumped right in, it was, yeah, okay, let's go, let's do it. She wanted to get it done, no hesitation. And, the people at Mass General were great. And again, the hockey community kind of rallied behind us. the government insurance paid for the transplant, but you had to pay for the blood. So all the Bruins and their wives went down and donated blood in my name and Cindy's name. The linesmen came to visit me, and the referees came to visit, and I remember he gave us a little radio. I still have it to listen to, so we could listen to the Bruins games.
Wow.
And so it was a time that was kind of hectic. You didn't know how it was going to turn out, but
Hmm.
I think it kind of all kind of came to fruition where after I had the transplant and I woke up, Dad was in my room, and right away they said, "Get up and walk around." Like, I just opened my eyes, and I'm like, "I just had a transplant. I'm not walking around." And Dad yelled at me, "Get up!" so so I got up and walked down to Cindy's room, and Cindy was with Mom, and then we were all there together, and almost immediately I felt a lot better. Like, it was, I don't think it's one of those things that creeps up on you. You don't know how bad you feel until you stop feeling bad, and you go, "Oh, this is the way I'm supposed to feel."
Right.
Um, and then that seemed to kind of put in perspective how important it was for me and how much sacrifice Cindy was, because man, they sliced her from stem to stern. It's not like it is today where it's a very non-invasive surgery.
Well, she mentioned seeing you come into the room and saying, come on a walk, and that you were up and moving, and she
Yeah.
said, "No, I want some more morphine. Like, I want to stay here." And then seeing what was very recently your kind of paler complexion actually flush was
Yeah.
an indicator to her that this was the right thing to do, and that just made it all worth it to
Yeah.
see.
Yeah, and it was great. Like, there was no hesitation from Cindy, and it was like that. Let's get this done, and it was a huge sacrifice. And then now here I am, knock on wood, 40 years later, and it's still going strong. I'm able to live the life that I am because of Cindy. I always say it's by the grace of God and Cindy that I'm still here.
And over the years since then, your family's been involved in supporting organ donation campaigns and so on. Do you want to touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, Cindy really kind of spearheaded that, and my mom was also kind of was working with that. But Cindy worked with the Kidney Foundation for a while, and she did a lot of work with the Western Hockey League, raised a lot of money. Um, and unfortunately, the name escapes me. Brule, I think it is, was one of the hockey players at the Humboldt Broncos that died in a crash, and he donated his organs, and Cindy worked with them, with their family for a while, when they got their foundation off the ground. And so, the whole thing is just kind of the awareness and getting people to understand that, if you donate a kidney, you can still live a full life. And let people know that there's a lot of options out there, and it's a scary time, and surprise, kind of strangely, my daughter, she got a job at Toronto General at the transplant unit as an administrator. She worked
Wow.
there for about 2 years, so that was always kind of strange, but
Full circle.
full circle for sure.
Yeah.
I think once you go through it, you realize how important it is to make sure that people understand about how important kidneys are, and what the treatments are. Cindy was big on doing that and raising money. But Cindy was like with that, with the Don Cherry Pet Rescue Foundation. She spent a lot of time with that, made a lot of money helping people, with their foundations, their pet and animal foundations. And then her big triumph, I think, was the Rose Cherries Home for Kids, which was a palliative care home and respite home for kids, which is now the Darling Home for Kids. But that was such a battle. I mean, Dad and Cindy, I mean, that was such yeoman's work getting that off the ground. Cindy slowly starting to network, and that's what it is, connecting with the right people, and
Right.
got it up a ground, and now it's expanding, and touched hundreds, if not thousands, of people's lives.
Absolutely. That passion for advocacy that she and your father shared was really palpable. It was very interwoven throughout the pages of the book, from
Yeah.
the organ donation. And I think one of the misconceptions around organ donation as well that she really emphasized is that you have to be deceased in order to participate in
Right.
organ donation. So
Right.
emphasizing living donation as an option as well
Yeah.
was something really kind of pertinent throughout the book also.
Right. Right. I mean, it's at the point now where people, the doctors can say, hey, your kidneys are failing. They're eventually going to be failing. You're going to need a transplant. And if you can get a living transplant before you go on dialysis, it's a lot better. Because once you go on dialysis, it takes a toll on your body.
Absolutely.
So you mentioned how, and in the book, Cindy writes about this whole phase of life of Don Cherry as a hockey player, moving from city to city to city, and then you touched on kind of transitioning out of that into coaching a bit, but realizing he's, his late 30s, has a grade 9 education, and it was really tough times. So in the book, she talks about him working with Jerry Patterson and sort of coming up with this set of boxes of strategy to try
Right.
to move his career forward.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to do a little quote here because one part of it is about storytelling. So she writes, the first of Jerry's boxes were banquets, aka the rubber chicken circuit. Jerry drove Dad in his old four-door diesel Mercedes all over Ontario, and Dad perfected his storytelling persona. As soon as Dad would go off script, as in telling his opinion about something, Jerry would lecture him all the way home. Nobody wants to hear about your philosophy of life and its lessons. Stick to your hockey stories. That was so true. In the next box was written radio show. When Dad came home from taping his first 5 radio shows, he said to Mom, I don't know how long I can keep this up. I may run out of stories. After at least 4,200 shows and 35 years of The Great Blind Show with Brian Williams, heard coast to coast on at least 100 radio stations, he never did run out. So maybe just touch on his process of learning storytelling. He used storytelling to impact Canadian culture and really cement, hockey as a part of Canadian culture. What was the importance of storytelling to Don Cherry sort of becoming who he was?
Well, I think, I think at that time it was important. Again, what happened was Dad met Jerry Patterson right after he got fired from Colorado, coaching the Colorado Rockies. And I'm pretty sure Dad kind of got blackballed because he went to war with 2 general managers. He went to war with Harrison and Ray Muron. And once you kind of do that, and you get the reputation that you're a coach that won't work with GMs, nobody wants to hire you, right? And then Ralph Mellenby asked him to do Hockey Night in Canada. It wasn't Coach's Corner then. And I think you got $500 a show for Hockey Night in Canada. So it wasn't something you're going to make a living on. And so Dad had met Jerry Patterson, and when Jerry would sit down and have a beer, Dad, that's been 18 years in the minor. So everything that happened in Slapshot, Dad saw and worse, right? And so Jerry said, I think these would be good things to go on the banquet circuit, and you could tell these stories. And little thing, I don't know if City put it in this version of the book or the other. I think it's maybe on the next version. Dad took a Dale Carnegie course when he was young, how to win friends and influence people and learn how to talk in front of people. And so he had a bit of knowledge on it, but he wasn't very good. He said the first 2 years he was doing it, but he watched guys like Dennis Hall and Story, who was a great storyteller, and some other ones. And then he kind of learned how to tell a proper joke, and that's basically what Dad got. Dad went up and told some hockey stories, told a couple jokes and stuff like that. And then he got more and more comfortable, and I think that helped Dad get, talking in front of a lot of people. Kind of the next step is getting in front of the television camera, and I think that helped him. So part of the storytelling was that Dad had so many stories, right? Because he lived this crazy life in the American Hockey League and all not even the American Hockey League, all through minor hockey league, all through North America, and got pretty good at telling all these different stories with all these crazy characters like Eddie Shore and Brian Kilray and Jimmy McKinney and all the crazy guys that he met during his time playing and coaching.
And I guess kind of on the heels of storytelling, because at this point it very much seems to run in the family, you wrote and produced Keep Your Head Up, Kid. What was the moment that you realized that you needed to tell the story?
I just thought it was such a good story. And at that point, I forget, it was maybe about 10 years ago, 15 years ago. Most of the people had grown up watching Dad on Coach's Corner. And Dad would say, "Oh, I coached the Bruins." "Oh, you coached the Bruins? Oh, you played actually." Like, people didn't realize that, what Dad's career was, because they had seen him for 25, 30 years on Coach's Corner. So I sat down and I started to write the script. And I got to a point where I thought, you know what, I think this would be good. So then I brought it to Dad, and Dad and I sat and we wrote a lot of stuff together and got, yeah, put that in. No, I don't want to put this in, and stuff like that. And again, I kind of copied it on Goodfellas, where it's a story of my mom marrying my dad, and then all of a sudden joining this crazy, violent hockey life. It was one of the biggest miniseries that CBC shown. I still think it holds the record for our first and second night. And it was by far the hardest thing I think I've ever had to do, because it was so close to the bone. And like publishing and like writing, once it started getting traction, too many people had their fingers in the pie of what they wanted to do. And there was just a lot of people that CBC that I just didn't think had a good concept of what we wanted to do. And we insisted on Jared Kiso to play Dad, because he did kind of an interpretation, not an impersonation of Dad. Jared went on to do Letterkenny and, a bunch of different other shows. He's been very successful. And at one point, I had toyed with the idea of having it through Mom's lens, because they always say that the best sports movie is Bull Durham. Well, that's told through Susan Sarandon's character, right? She does the voiceover. And I thought, yeah, why don't we do it through Mom's? And that was a little bit too radical. So we didn't. And I think that when people watch it, they saw, okay, this is how Don Cherry kind of became the person we see on Coach's Corner. And I think that was important for me, that, okay, you see this guy in Coach's Corner, but how did he become that guy in Coach's Corner?
Absolutely. I want to talk a little bit about what you mentioned with the challenges around it being so close to home, and how, as it gained traction, as it gained popularity, how do you think that narrative might have looked different had somebody else been left to tell that?
I think the big thing that Cindy and I, because Cindy helped quite a bit on that, was we wanted to have it authentic.
Mhm.
I remember early on, I had written the script, and I went to CBC, and they liked it, and they says, well, we maybe want, this writer who had just won this writing prize to kind of go over it. So I was sitting there with him, and he said, I think what we want to do for the big scene where there was too many men on the ice, Guy Lafleur gets the puck, and he goes up and he gives your dad a wink, and he goes in and scores. I go, whoa. I go, no, this is through the eyes of dad. They, like, that would never happen in a million years. Like, well, what are you talking about? Well, and I think it would have been, that's why I think sports movies don't do well, is because the people that write them don't know about sports. And quite frankly, I don't think they respect the sports.
Mm.
Cindy and I were talking about it. I says, I want to get actual footage, and Cindy agreed with me, of the game 7 in Montreal and the Bruins games, because you can't recreate that in real life. You can't create the Montreal Forum going crazy with 16,000 people in a 3-2 game. You can't create that. So you create a little bit on the bench with Jared and some of the actors, but for the actual action, you have it. You use footage from the National Hockey League. And I think that that's why people liked it and identified with it. And I just think that it was important that Cindy and I, and again, Cindy's a big part of that, told Mom and Dad's story. And the funny thing was, not too long after that, there was a movie on Jack Layton that CBC did, and didn't get very good reviews. And I went to watch the screening of it, and Olivia Chow got on, and because Olivia Chow was, Jack Layton's wife at the time. And she says, well, it's really good, but this didn't really happen, and that didn't happen, and Jack would never do this, and I'm thinking, well, what am I watching this for? If
Right.
the wife's coming up saying this isn't really what happened, and this is how Jack didn't react, and you know what? I think the people watch it kind of go, yeah, this didn't seem to be authentic. So again, I think it's the authenticity that would have suffered, and I think that's a big thing on a lot of, well, a lot of, biographies or in movies.
In maintaining that authenticity, there's also some semblance of vulnerability at play that comes into that.
Yeah.
How did you balance being Don Cherry's son and a storyteller when it came to creating something that was so personal?
Well, I think, Cindy and I had a couple of discussions about that. And, I think the main priority was I had to be the gatekeeper of the story and I had to do what dad wanted to do. And a great story was that, mom got cancer and passed away. So how do we show that? Because it's a big part of the story. Well, CBC wanted to show mom in the hospital. Cindy and I were saying, no, we're not going to do that. It's a little bit too close to the bone. And so CBC and myself and Cindy got into this huge, huge argument. And to the point where I said, well, if you want a scene of mom in the hospital with tubes running out of her, let's just cancel. Let's just say forget it. And Jeff Volna, who was the director who did a great job, he said, let me handle it. I'll do it. And did it in a much more poignant way where there was a scene where mom and dad and Blue were in a park bench and mom was talking about you getting a new host, Ron McLean. Be nice to Ron. Don't this was the first time they met Ron. Be nice to Ron and all that. And then had a scene a few scenes later where it was just dad and Blue on the bench. They knew that mom had cancer. And then my mom and dad talked about it in the movie, but they didn't show the hospital. They just showed dad sitting by himself with Blue. And I thought it was a lot more poignant. I thought it was a lot more cinematic other than beating you over the head with, having Sarah, who played my mom, in the hospital with tubes running out of her. So it was those things that you had to fight, and I think at the end of the day made it better. But there was just some things that you wouldn't do. I talked to dad that my dad's father died of brain cancer, I guess shortly, maybe a couple of years after Sydney was born. And then my mom's dad lived in Hershey, Pennsylvania, and drove up for the funeral. And then he died in a car accident on the way home. And so mom and dad lost both their fathers within a matter of days. And now I said, do you want to talk about that? Because, that kind of was a real, I don't want to say bonding, but it's kind of cemented your relationship. And dad goes, no, he goes, that's too personal. So there were things that, that we had to talk, that dad and I talked about, Cindy and I talked about that. Now we don't want to put that in. So again, to me, it was most importantly telling the story properly, but making sure that everybody in the family was comfortable of what was being told.
Absolutely. In the Don Cherry story, Cindy's very personal book about your dad. There it
I
is.
gotta say, I love the cover.
The cover's amazing. Oh, Tim's got his
You look
copy
like
there
you're on the
too.
cover of Peaky Blinders.
It does. It has a Peaky Blinders vibe. I should grab my Kindle and pull up my cover too. When you first read the book, what struck you most about it? And did it reveal anything new to you or anything surprising to you? Or was there a specific story that kind of shouted out, like, yes, that's dad?
I hate to say, I read the book. I think the big thing that I was really happy with was that it was in Cindy's voice. And again, knowing, dad going through his books and doing the movie, that it was important for Cindy to have her voice. And a lot of her friends that read the book said, you know what, like I heard Cindy's voice in my ear, and I think that was really important. And when I was reading it, like kind of the manuscript, she sends some stuff over, and I would kind of look and give a little couple of notes in here and there. Not very many though. When you get it different, you're kind of reading it a little bit different. Then when you get the book and you're kind of reading the book for reading the book and not picking it apart. I was very proud of Cindy the way she wrote that in her voice, because that's not an easy thing to do. It's not an easy thing, to sit down and write something and make it sound authentic.
Right.
But Cindy and I know all the stories there, so there was no not too many surprises.
There's lots of little anecdotes that are from Cindy's perspective, right? She's
Right.
sitting in the back seat of the car all those times when they're traveling and moving to different hockey towns, and
Yeah.
hearing the sounds of the clicking, which in retrospect she realized are the high beams and the low beams, and
Yeah.
there's no stopping to go to the bathroom except when it's a scheduled stop, so she
Right.
had to wait. And then she breaks into a lot of like parenting
Right.
anecdotes that are quite interesting.
Yeah.
But maybe switching gears, you mentioned your dad dropping out of school, maybe grade 9, and and doing a Dale Carnegie course. You would think he had a Harvard MBA or something, but maybe his life advice might be drop out of school earlier rather than later and buy a Dale Carnegie book and get active. One thing I didn't realize is just the scale of different entrepreneurial activities
Yeah.
that both Don and often the whole family in different ways was involved with. So
Yeah.
he authored 6 books.
Yeah.
He had a national radio show, The
Yeah.
Grapevine Show, for 35 years.
Yeah.
He had the TV platform with Coach's Corner, but also the Grapevine
Grapevine
Show,
show.
and launching a sports restaurant
Right.
franchise.
The Grapevine. Yeah, they went from the television shows to the actual. So it was the television show was set in a fictional bar, and then they started. Well, let's do a real bar, and then opened up a whole bunch of bars.
And then the Rock'em Sock'em videos, which
Right.
is something she describes really getting into the homes of people on Christmas Day, and people watching those to keep their kids busy. So, and it's often in a lot of these stories, the family will be involved in one way, shape, or form. Sometimes very heavily. Other times it's like, for example, Cindy was um on the Grapevine TV show, like in the audience to make it look like there's people at first, or actually working in the restaurant.
Right.
And she describes when one of the restaurant was sold that she continued working there for a period of time, and was working the till and doing this and that. So maybe touch on what your role was and the family's role in some of these ventures as they happened. And was there a grand strategy to it all, or did it just sort of fall into place?
I think once Dad was becoming popular on Coach's Corner, there was an awful lot of people coming with Dad with different ventures that they wanted Dad to get into. So I think Dad kind of lived in a very small world, his hockey world, right? Like that was kind of where he was. A lot of the stuff he didn't understand. So it was kind of Cindy and I to sit down and kind of filter out, Dad's not interested in this, Dad's not interested in that. And then once we got something we thought Dad would be interested in, we would bring it to him. But the one thing that Dad was very kind of uh, and Cindy and I then all kind of got into it was that it was something that he would want to use or something that he would want to do. That was he would gravitate towards. I mean, one thing that looking back that Cindy and I tried to talk Dad into and he refused to do was he came. A lot of clothiers came with him wanting to do a line of clothes, Don Cherry clothes, and were offering crazy amounts of money. But Dad said, "Are they made in Canada?" And they go, "No." And then Dad goes, "I can't be pushing Canada and then have my suits made overseas," which plays very popular nowadays. So people can talk the talk. Dad walked the walk. Dad walked away from, I would say, as much money as he would have been making on Coach's Corner with suits because the suits wouldn't be made overseas. And that, and then the next kind of step was we'd take something to Dad and then we would talk to them about how do you want to use Dad and Mom, because Mom was in some commercials too, right, early on. And sometimes they would want Dad to do things or say things and we just would say, no, that's not going to happen. And then sometimes we would sit and rewrite the commercials, like Dad did the Dominion lending and he met the guy, and Dad had to meet the people and he had to get a feel of whether he wanted to work with them or not. And he liked the people at Dominion lending. and they were going to do a commercial. And I said, "How are you going to do a commercial about mortgages, Dad? Come on." I said, "Do you know what a mortgage, like, you know how to advertise though?" So he goes, "No, I don't know anything about mortgages." So I said, "Well, that should be the commercial, right? I know dogs, I know hockey, I know suits, but I don't know mortgages." And they did that, and they won a whole bunch of advertising awards because of it. Cindy and I were kind of I think, the barrier, and then we'd kind of let it filter down to Dad, and then Dad would have to get a feel, and then once Dad got a feel, then Cindy and I would say, okay, we want to make sure that there's got to be some authenticity. We don't want you to do something that you wouldn't feel comfortable with. So a quick
And
funny story was that Dad and Mom did Men in Speed Brace. They slap say thanks, I needed that. I don't know if you remember those commercials, but that was Men in Skin Bracer, and you put it on and you go, thanks, I needed that. So they had Mom and Dad getting ready, and Dad was talking. He goes, "Oh, Rose, aren't I a good-looking guy? Oh, Rose, I'm the best thing." And Mom put this Men in Skin Bracer and slapped Dad, and Dad goes, "Thanks, Rose. I needed that." And it was hilarious. I mean, it was Dad's best, Mom and Dad's best commercial, and then we couldn't use it though because it was too violent.
you were really involved in the Rock'em Sock'em series, right?
Yeah,
And then both you and Cindy, like sometimes Cindy did other jobs outside of hockey, and what about yourself? It sounds like you guys were really involved in sort of almost filtering the business ideas, but then
yeah,
sometimes did you branch away and
yeah. I worked on a lot of television. I did a few golf shows, a fishing show. I did a couple of documentaries and things like that.
scout it? Scout it? Cindy mentioned
Yes, I
scouting.
scouted. Yeah, that was one thing. Yes, I also scouted with the OHL Essential Scouting, and that was something that was a lot of fun. And Dad would come out with me quite a bit to watch. They were might called minor midgets back then, but they're under 16s, and now they're called. And I'd go out 2 3 nights a week, and Dad would come out and watch. And I think that was one of the highlights of Dad's week, was going out and watching the kids play. We saw, Mitch Marner and Connor McDavid and Drew Doughty and, Jordan Binnington, all those guys that are in the NHL now. When they were little 15-year-old, McDavid's case, 13-year-old kids, we'd go out scouting, and that would be a lot of fun. And Dad got a good sense of kind of what was going on in the hockey world, and in the minor hockey world. A lot of parents would come up and talk to him, and we're always respectful, and wait till the period was come over and get autographs and stuff like that. So it was scouting was a lot of fun with Dad.
So I mentioned Cindy has a lot of little anecdotes involving parenting, both her own parenting philosophy, and she mentions Dell many times in various spots in the book, and then also maybe the parenting philosophy of that Don had, or that he had with you guys. She tells some funny stories. One was with regards to, she says one of her close friends was Leanne Domi, because Cindy's son Dell and Max Domi, who's now Toronto Maple Leaf player, the son of Ty Domi, who was a infamous fighter in the NHL and hockey player. So they were really close friends because their kids were friends. And so here's a little quote. Max's mom Leanne and I were good friends with the same philosophies on raising our children. We were tough on them. We were the opposite of many of our peers, to say the least. In other words, we were no granola or helicopter moms. And then she tells the story of when Dell came home, had something happened at recess, and he had a bruised arm or something, and wasn't bleeding, there's no scrapes or anything. So she says, be tough. You've got hockey practice.
Suck it up.
You're only a goaltender, so I'm sure you can manage. Sends him off to hockey, but a week later he's still complaining about his sore arm. So she takes him to the hospital, and then they go to do an X-ray, and she says, "Well, I hope he doesn't have a broken bone, because he's been playing hockey this past week." And then the doctor comes out and says, "Will the mother who lets her child play hockey with broken bones come forward?" And she felt horrible.
Yeah,
But and then a few weeks later, she gets a call, and she says she gets a call from Leanne, who says, that exclusive club for parents who let their kids play hockey with broken bones? Can you sign me up, please?" And I guess she had a similar incident with Max Domi, where she said, just toughen up. Hockey players play hurt, and
Yeah.
then she had a similar situation. So anyway, Dell gets his cast, and Dawn, she says, signs his cast. I forget what he signed on it, but
Them the breaks. Them the breaks.
them the breaks, and talks about it on his show. You know how tough we are. So maybe just touch on this this theme of grit and working hard and being resilient. It's actually a really big theme in popular culture these days. But maybe any anecdotes you have, or was that the philosophy you guys were raised with? Was you got to be tough. There's a real world you have to survive in.
I think it was, that was kind of the hockey player's code, right? Like you could play hurt, but you can't play injured, right? So you better be showing a bone or you better be cut. I remember, I remember one time, my first time playing in scrimmage. So I would have been like maybe 5 or 6. And, back then we didn't wear visors. I got a stick and I got cut over the eye, and just a little cut. And then, so I didn't even go to the dad. Just cut. They call them butterflies, like tape, and he put them over my eye, and it stopped the bleeding. And so mom wasn't there. This was at a hockey school, so mom wasn't there, and so dad drove me home. So dad says, "Come here," and he took the butterflies off and he squeezed my cut so it started to bleed. And if you ever know around the eye, you really bleed, right? And then he got the blood, he smeared it all over my face. And he says, "Now go in and say hello to your mom." So mom saw it. It just went bananas. That's it. He's never playing hockey again. Just went crazy. And then, so now it's backfired because dad's thinking, now Tim's not going to be able to play hockey anymore. So then all of a sudden dad goes, "Well, wait a minute. He's got a little cut and you're all upset." He goes, "I got 17 stitches over the eye last year." Mom goes, "You're not my flesh and blood. You're just a big galoot." No, that was kind of our philosophy. Yeah, if you're hurt, you get up and get better, and then go back out there. And I really think that mentality helped me with the transplant. Was that okay? I was sick. Okay, you got to go get. I almost had the mentality of it was like a broken leg. Now I got to get a transplant, and then I got to get better to get back out there. And I think that helped. And then I think with Cindy and a young Max Domi, I also think that it's also not so much the physical, but the mental. You have to be mentally strong because kids are going to make fun of when the Leafs lose. Kids are going to give Max a hard time. "Oh, your dad's team sucks," and all that. And you learn how to deal with that, right? You learn how to deal with adversity, and you learn how to deal with losing, and somebody's saying something to you. Don't let it get, you got to let it roll off your back because that was the world that we were in, right? And bode well because it was tough when dad was on coach's corners and people are calling him xenophobic and misogynist and a troglodyte and all that stuff. Now dad did bring it on a lot himself, but Cindy and I kind of learned at an early age to let that roll off our back because you know Bruins lose game 7, too many men on the ice. It was, Don Cherry's fault, and you got all that stuff, and I just gone through the transplant, and then that happened, and people blaming your father for the Bruins losing the Stanley Cup. You learn how to deal with that at a young age, right? And you learn that, okay, it'll pass, and you got to move on to the next adventure.
I am a parent to two young girls. I've got a 3-year-old and I've got a 1-year-old. And as Tim alluded to, there very much is a large emphasis on quote unquote gentle parenting, or as Cindy mentioned in that passage, helicopter parenting.
Yeah,
And the subject matter is quite polarizing sometimes
yeah,
in the world of social media,
yeah,
which maybe suggests that our generation is a little bit overprotective of our kids.
yeah.
And given the way that you and Cindy were raised, do you think that there has been any benefit to the way that parenting has evolved? Or do you think that maybe it's more of a hindrance
I think
to
it's a
today's
hindrance.
kids? Yeah.
I really do. I my and I was tougher on my daughter. Like I wasn't tough as on my daughter as Cindy was on Cindy was pretty tough on Dal. But I remember one time my daughter fell and she scraped her knee, and she's holding her knee and it's like she was shot. And then I said, Grace, I said, it's a long way from your heart. Get up. She said, what do you mean? I said, you're not going to die from it. So get up. And so she kind of learned like that. But I got to be honest with you. I taught at a college, and I just see the kids, and I don't know if it's parenting or if it's the overall social media getting bombarded from all the different things, that the kids just don't seem to be as prepared
Mm,
as we were, right? There's some things I might have done a little bit different with my daughter. In some aspects, I might have been a little bit easier on her, but there's some aspects I probably would have been a little bit harder on her.
mm,
I just think it's easier teaching the kids a harder lesson when they're younger than having to teach them a harder lesson when they're 21, 22, or 18 or 19. And I
right.
think the big thing that Cindy and I talked about when I had my daughter, and it's a little bit different. But my daughter's adopted. So when she was 2 years old coming out of the orphanage, her first 2 years was dog eat dog. Like she had a much different upbringing than most people. But, my Cindy said to me, she says, "You can't change the rules on her." She says, "If you're letting her get away with something that you don't like, and then when she becomes older, you can't say you can't do that anymore." And I'm like, "Well, why are you changing the rules?" She says, "Set the rules early and let that be the rule from then on, because on that." And I think the big thing that mom and dad, and I don't like the word harder, because when you say it harder, it's a negative context, right?
Mhm.
Oh, they're hard on you. Or they were tougher on you. It's a negative context. I think mom and dad stood back and let us find ourselves, let us fail, and if we failed and we were whining about it, they'd say, "Okay, get up." Oh, well, too bad. And again, a hockey mentality. You lost. You got to get ready for the next game. And that was, I think that was the thing that how mom and dad taught us. And I try to teach my daughter. Okay, things didn't go well, suck it up, and you got to get ready for your next job, or you got to get ready. You just can't dwell on things. So, but I think parenting today, from my perspective, it's so hard with the social media, right? Because kids tend to listen to their friends or their age group more than they listen to your parents. And it's same with us, though. Like I always say, the older I get, the smarter my dad got.
Right. I mean, I think what you mentioned about trying something and failing is a really powerful thing. I also grew
Yeah.
up in a household having a safe environment to try and fail without worrying about the consequence necessarily of what that action looked like. And it really instilled a sort of confidence to be able to go out,
Yeah.
do new things, try new things, and really secure that sense of independence, I think.
Yeah.
It seems to be lacking in a lot of kids these days.
Yeah. Well, I think that again, that's where sports comes on, where my daughter really never, I try to get her into hockey and I try to get her in different sports, and she was more on the artsy side. She was more a photographer and drawing and arts, which is fine with me, because actually dad was an excellent art. Not that there's any bloodlines, but dad is an excellent artist. Like dad was really, his mom wanted him to become a commercial artist.
Wow.
And I remember in Rochester, dad in the basement drew all the Walt Disney characters playing hockey in the Rochester American uniforms. And his brother, Dick Cherry, who unfortunately just passed away, he was an unbelievable artist with carving ducks and stuff like that. So there was a very artistic side to dad's family. But my daughter didn't, she kind of gravitates towards that side, but she never played sports, and she never learned to lose. And I think for young kids, the most important thing that sports teaches you at that age is you learn to lose. You learn that there's other people that are better than you, even though, oh, everybody's saying, no, some kids are better than you. You learn to lose, and it's not your fault. The referee might have screwed you, made a bad call, and you lost. I think those are young life lessons that are really important for everybody to learn. And I think if you don't play the sports, you don't get it. I remember scouting. My wife used to come um, watch, and there was a kid, and I think it was Wyatt Johnson, who I think is playing on Team Canada now. He made the National Hockey League, but he was 15 years old. I think it was him. If I'm wrong, sorry. Um, but he was playing on a team, the Toronto Marlies, and they were sick with the flu, and they only had about 3 guys on the bench. It was a really short bench. It was a really important game, and he was playing a ton. And he came off the bench, and he took his helmet off, and he got sick in a bucket. And then he put his helmet on and went back out there. And I said, that kid's going to be all right because obviously he's not feeling good, and but he knows his teammates are counting on him. And it's like, well, I can't play. I got to go out there because my team's counting on me. And I thought, that's a good life lesson, even if he never played hockey again. To that, hey, I'm gonna have to maybe not go on that trip on the weekend. I'm gonna have to stay home and do the work because the people on my job are counting on me.
That's a great lesson. Learning to lose from sports and move on, learning that some people are better than you at this or that. Yeah, with regards to parenting, there used to be the quote, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And also, sticks and stones will break my bones, but words will never hurt me. I remember learning that one as a kid, and I guess your family getting, you know, true, your dad would dish it out. So Cindy makes the point, if you dish it out, you need to also be able to take the hits
I
as
take it.
well. But certainly, you guys would have some lessons on how to deal with online comments and disparaging comments and
Yeah,
so on.
yeah,
So, and the book, Cindy doesn't hold back. Every way that your dad was attacked, she has a chapter on it.
right.
And it was funny because when I spoke to her, she said, "I'm not defending my dad in any way." And of course, you read the book and you're like, she's defending her dad. So I was trying to remember what exactly she said there, and then I realized there is a passage in one of the chapters where she talks about like some of the insults were so kind of ridiculous it almost gives them credence when you come out in a defensive way. But the theme of failing and then moving on, which you learn through sports, not every chapter, but a lot of chapters in Don's life, the chapter ends with him getting fired, and then the next adventure comes. So it's almost like the Trailer Park Boys series, where every season ends with them going to jail, and then it begins with them getting out of jail with a new
Yeah,
set of
yeah,
adventures. So the last time Don got fired was sort of the Poppygate. So this is when Remembrance Day, leading up to Remembrance Day 2019, and Cindy has a couple chapters on it. So the gist of it is your dad goes on air and he's talking about the importance of wearing a poppy to honor the people who put their lives on the line, who lose limbs to protect our freedoms and to give us the opportunities that we have in Canada. And he mentions, people come from all over the world. We come to Canada because of the freedoms that we have. So we should honor veterans. We should, and he has the opinion of, wearing the poppy is one way that we can do that. And so Cindy describes it, and she talks about your family kind of opening up the home when Don has his conversations with the bosses, and it's like, okay, I've had my decades and decades. If this is it, this is it. So she describes kind of inviting the reporters into the home, switching rooms so there's different backgrounds, serving tea perhaps. She also talks about the fallout besides just the end of Coach's Corner. She talks about some of the work with organ donation campaigns. So Don had been supporting it. It had raised over $500,000, and so Cindy sort of mentioned, after that got canceled, and even her own invitation to go to the event, she sort of says like one volunteer complained, but she doesn't blame organizations. Because she knows they're just protecting themselves, and she talks about the left-wing media she sometimes refers to, but label Don, who's more conservative, to sort of put these labels of racist or what have you, and so she's not blaming them because they don't want to get those labels thrown on them because of either the media or a group of activists or a smaller group of activists. And Don came out, and his response is, his main point was about supporting veterans. If it was interpreted as focusing on new Canadians or immigrants, like okay, that could be a conversation, but his main point is that everybody should support that, and so he's trying to kind of reduce any insult people could have taken. And Cindy also talks about gratitude to both the CBC and Sportsnet and Rogers for all the opportunities they have, and if this is going to be it, this is going to be it. So there's a lot in the book on not just that controversy, but
Yeah.
many others. But what's your take on maybe how the family sort of how it unfolded and sort of how you thought about it?
It was interesting. Cindy and I kind of had different when we were watching it. Cindy was in Ottawa, I believe, watching it. She was working at a pet expo for the Rescue Foundation. I was watching at home, and I was actually leaving the next day to go down to New York. And I was watching it with my wife, and I went, "Uh oh!" And I thought, and I go, because I just think it was timing, and it was at the height, if you want to call it, cancel culture. Sir Johnny McDonald was gone, and they were taking down the statue of Queen Victoria. So it was like, you know what? I go, I think Dad's going to be in trouble. And then I called Dad Sunday morning, and I said, yeah, you got anything from Dad? No, no, no. Well, we're going to New York. And then when I got to New York, like my phone had actually blown up, right? Like I had like about 50 messages on it and all that. And so I just, like it was to me, I think it was time to go. I want people to read the book because there were certain things in there. So there's Cindy goes into a lot more detail. I don't want to kind of spoil it here, but I think if Dad did what Rogers wanted him to do to get back, and it was a lot more than apologize, I think it would have ruined Dad's legacy. And it was funny because when Dad got fired from Boston, from the Bruins, he didn't get fired. Harry Sinden didn't offer him a contract, but Harry said, "You can't do this, and you can't do this, and you can't do this." And so Dad was thinking about it, and Dad and Mom were talking about it, and Dad said, "Either Harry's going to get me now, or he's going to get me halfway through the season, and I'm going to be fired. So I'm just not going to sign the deal, and we'll go on." And I think Rogers was ready to get rid of Dad. I think they were getting too much heat from Dad, not only from being the Poppygate stuff, but other things. So I thought, it was time to go. Dad had been fired so many times from CBC. "Oh, this is your last year. Oh, we're going to fire you at the end of the year." But I knew that this was kind of a much different climate in the world. And I wonder if Dad would have said that now, would he have been fired? I don't know. Like I think
He
it's a
was
different climate.
only 85 at the time, or too, right? The ripe young age.
Yeah, yeah, I know. So that's what somebody said to me. He goes, "Well, your father's unemployed now." And I said, "The hell, man? How long you want him to work for?" So, but yeah, it was a real whirlwind, and it was kind of like boom, that happened, and then COVID hit right after. Everybody says, how did it affect your dad?" Well, I says, "I think it was busy when you first happened for the first month. You're busy and everything like that." Um, and doing interviews and doing all that stuff. And then I was scouting still, so Dad was coming out 2 3 nights a week, and then I'd make sure we go out Saturday so he wouldn't have to watch Hockey in Canada. And then Sunday he was fired on the Monday. Sunday we started the podcast again just to keep him, make sure there was something for him to keep busy. And then when COVID hit, kind of like everything stopped, right? And it was a bit of a, so that, and then I think that's when everything kind of like, wow, that's like, coach's corner's gone, and we're not going out scouting, and all that. So I think that was a little bit of a rough time for everybody, right? And
And Cindy
but
does paint that picture of as famous and popular and out there as Don Cherry was, he's still, it's a pretty close inner circle, especially when it comes to friendships and
yeah,
then especially the importance of family, and even realizing that you and Cindy and Don, you all live within a
yeah, like Dad and I were literally about a minute away, and Sydney was only about 10 minutes away. Yeah. Yeah, and I think that for people that are listening to this, I know everybody's going to want, "Well, what did we think of Ron McLean?" That's a big thing. I think they'll be surprised if you read the book. Our take on the Dad and Ron's. I don't want to give it away, but Dad and Ron have were together for 30 years. That's longer than a lot of marriages.
Hmm.
It's For me, it was tough to see it end the way it ended. And Cindy and I have very much the same philosophy, but again, I think people are interested to see how we see that relationship and what happened there.
Absolutely.
Read the chapter Ron in the
Right.
book.
Yeah.
Yeah. Definitely. Now, you spoke a little bit about the concern around how this would impact your dad's legacy had he apologized. For readers who may only know your dad from his time on television, what do you hope they take away from the Don Cherry story about who he is beyond the spotlight and the headlines?
I think that I think much like when we did the mini series, it gives the people a broader perspective of what dad was like, where he came from, maybe how he got some of his opinions. And dad, mom lived in an era that is will never come back, right? It was a lot different to when they were married and raising kids and in the 60s and 70s. um, and again, where dad came from, and again, Cindy, we were talking about. You said Cindy was defending her dad. Cindy and I talked about that. I can say, yeah, you can defend your dad, but don't apologize for that. She's, oh no, I'm never going to apologize. It's not an apology book, that's for sure. And I think where dad came from, and I think just such a rich. Again, I just like reading books on people's lives, right? Like the books that I read are I don't read too much fiction. I like reading either biographies or historical books. But like Dad, I mean, that's the one thing Cindy talks about. Dad is just an unbelievable reader of books. Like he just devours books. He likes watching old movies and he reads. And again, I think the last fiction book he wrote was 3 Day Road by the Canadian author about the two natives in the Battle of Vimy Ridge. But it's just I hope people enjoy it. It's a good read. It's a fun read. You might have heard some of the stories, you might not have. And but it gives you a good insight to what was kind of going on once the whole Poppygate started going, and kind of somebody who was very intimate into the situation, what she felt like about what was going on and about Ron.
Absolutely. Tim, did you have anything to add?
No, I just said, here's the book. It's really doing well. This is a dad is doing his Peaky Blinders. Part of the proceeds goes to the Don Cherry Pet Rescue Foundation, which Cindy has started, and her son Dell is proudly continuing. But it's a fun read, and it's one of those ones you can take to the cottage. You can start on Friday and finish by Sunday for sure.
Absolutely. Well, we like to do a little segment here called The Plot Thickens. It
Okay.
is a question segment where I put out a call on social media and ask users to submit any questions that they have specifically for the guest that's coming onto the podcast. So the question that came in: hockey and blue are most notably two of your dad's greatest passions. What other hobbies of his might people be surprised to learn about? So, on the heels of you just talking about how he devours books, I'm curious to see what other hobbies people might not be aware of.
Well, again, Dad's 91 now, so he's a huge Blue Jay fan. He watches baseball religiously. He watches the hockey. He comes over to my house. We watched the Leafs debacle on when was it the other day on when Dad was younger. He used to fish a lot.
Mm,
Our Dad and Mom had a cottage down on Wolf Island, which is right across from Kingston, and we'd go fishing almost every day. So Dad was big fishing, and every once in a while, Dad he liked to draw, like to paint. Here, I'll show you one of Dad's paintings.
please.
This is one of his paintings. I don't know if you see it. It
Ah,
says "Life is a bowl of
Wow.
cherries."
nice.
That's amazing.
And as I say, Dad was he was an excellent artist, and so was his brother. That was their I guess they got that from their mother's side because mom used to be a tailor at the RMC and was really good at fixing up uh, uniforms and stuff. Other than that, dad didn't golf. He didn't play beer hockey. Didn't travel. Didn't like to travel. Dad didn't doesn't like to go out in the sun because he worked construction, right? So the enemy of the construction worker is the sun.
Yeah.
So dad goes, I spent all my life, he said, working in the sun on a jackhammer. I'm not sitting on a beach in the sun. So we actually went, Cindy touched on it briefly. We went to Hawaii just before dad went to Boston. So mom, Cindy, dad, and I. And dad stayed in the hotel room the whole time because he hated going out in the sun. And Watergate was going on. So dad was an expert on Watergate because he watched the whole thing from 9 o'clock to 6 o'clock, and he'd come down from dinner, and that was it. And I remember mom giving him heck saying, "Can you come out and do something with us?" And he as well. So we went to, we would go to museums, and that would be another thing if a hobby. Dad really liked to go to museums, and one time we were in England, and we went to the British War Museum, and they had like where the Victoria Crosses are, so that's where the highest medal you can get. And dad was in that room, I'm not exaggerating, 2.5 hours, like reading everything. So a quick funny story with that. So we were in London, and it was for a CBC show. Who Do You Think You Are? It's about dad's lineage. So we were in London, and we were staying at the Westin Hotel. So we had a couple of days off. So I said, Dad, let's go to the British War Museum. So he goes, okay. So I said, all right, I'll meet you downstairs in 20 minutes. So we go down. So dad's dressed full suit. He's got the suit, he's got the collars, got the tie on, he's got the little patent leather shoes with the thin soles. I said, Dad, why are you dressed like that? I said, first of all, those shoes are going to kill you. We're going into a museum. You know you're going to be there all day. Why don't you go upstairs? I said, get your pants on, get some running shoes on. Don't wear your shirt and tie. Dad goes, no. He goes, what if what if a fan recognizes me? I said, you're in London, England, Dad. Who's going to recognize you? So we get into this big argument. So he's, no, I'm not getting changed. So we go in, so we're waiting in front, and the doorman gets the cab, the black cab, right? Pulls up, and we open the door, and the guy gets out. He goes, "Hey, Don Cherry, I'm from Kingston." So I go, "See?" So, but he was dying. His shoes were killing him because the next day we went to the British Museum of Natural History, and he wore his running shoes. So that was Dad's things. He watches baseball. Used to like to fish. Was an avid reader. Likes to putter around the house. Take his dogs for a walk. That was a big thing. He always has his dogs, but like a real hobby, yeah, not too much.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining us for this conversation.
Well, thanks for having us.
It's been wonderful and so nice to have the opportunity to chat about Cindy's work and such an impassioned, I think, account of her dad through her eyes, which is just so special to now have that.
Yeah, I think when you read it, a lot of people said you could see it was a labor of love. It took a long time, and Tellwell was great with Cindy and had a great experience. And I know she would be extremely pleased with the outcome. And again, it's very bittersweet for me because I know that it's sweet because I'm so glad it's did so well on Amazon, and a little bit bitter because I would have liked to seen Cindy enjoy the fruits of her labor.
Absolutely.
So there it is.
Yes,
Don doing Thomas Shelby, Peaky Blinders. It's a great read.
it is. Absolutely.
Thanks a lot, Tim. It's great hearing the backstory, and thank you for that.
Yeah, well, I appreciate the time, and again, and thank you for all your hard work on getting the book to be a success because Tellwell was was a major part of it being successful.
Thank you. And for those listening, please be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen, or watch the full video on YouTube. We'll see you in the next one. Bye.